Well, good morning, everyone. So good to see each of you. I feel like only having 3 hours of our lives together in this space creates a really unique community, right? We get to know each other very quickly. And so thank you for being here. I'm so excited to kick off our second of 3 sessions. And today we will hear from our Office of Teaching and Learning. So excited to hear more from them and their work with the Kentucky MTSS, the Deeper Learning Dozen work, as well as our high quality instructional resources to support curriculum development. So thank you to those folks for being with us and for you all for diving in and engaging in the important work and conversations that we'll have. So I'm going to kick it over to Meredith to have our roll call, and then we'll dive right in with Misty Higgins.
Sasha Reinhardt.
Here.
Perfect, thank you. Crystal Rowland.
Here.
Chris Jarvis.
Here.
Holly Bloodworth. Patrice McCrary. Melody Cooper.
I'm here.
Sarah McIntosh. I see Sarah. Are you able to unmute? Make sure that you have. Here. Okay. Sarah, if you're able to unmute and just confirm your attendance for the record, that would be wonderful. Elizabeth Hack.
Here.
Joanne Adams. Sarah Snipes.
Here.
Arnav Dharmagada. Deborah Winkler. Kelsey Rubel. Fox Demoisi. I'm so sorry. I tried. Demoisi. There we go. Did I do Demoisi? I did the second time. Oh man. Okay. So close. I'm going to get it by the third time. Patrice McCrary.
I am here, but I don't know how long I can hang in there because my connection is not good. I'm in the Smoky Mountains right now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we will be happy to have you as long as you're able to join us. Thank you so much. Okay, Chair, you do have a quorum.
Thank you, Meredith. So we'll jump right into a really packed agenda of learning today. I believe Misty Higgins, you'll get us started with the team from OTL. Misty, I think you're on mute.
Sarah, can you see my screen?
We sure can.
Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. And first of all, just thank you for giving us an opportunity to update you on our work around supporting vibrant student learning experiences. My name is Misty Higgins, and I am one of the professional learning coordinators in the Division of Program Standards. And joining me is Thomas Klaus, our Education Academic Program Manager. And while all of our work can contribute to all three themes of the United We Learn vision, we focus primarily on how it really helps to facilitate vibrant student experiences in content area learning, with an emphasis on stakeholder communication and inclusion throughout many of our tools and resources. So I'm going to hand it over to Thomas, and he is going to share with you some of the broad ways in which our work connects to vibrant student experiences and deeper learning. And then I'll begin to go into more of the specific aspects of our work.
Thanks, Misty. So when thinking about connections between our work and the vibrant student learning experiences, first and foremost, we would say that the Kentucky academic standards themselves promote this with an emphasis on deeper learning. We see this connection in a couple of ways. First, as you look at each of the content area standards, the connection with deeper learning is elevated as students engage in the disciplinary practices of the standards to help them make sense of grade level content. On this slide, we have included a few examples of highlights to show this connection. So for instance, in science, one of the science and engineering practices really focuses on students generating and asking questions as they work to make sense of scientific phenomenon. One of our interdisciplinary literacy practices from the reading and writing standards really requires students to apply high-level cognitive processes to think deeply and critically about text. Within our social studies standards, one of the inquiry practices focuses on students investigating questions to gain insights using content, concepts, and tools from each of the social studies disciplines. And then one of our mathematical practices, or one of our standards for mathematical practices, is about students using models in mathematics as they move from concrete to representational and then to abstract understanding of content standards. The second connection to deeper learning we see within the CAS or the Kentucky Academic Standards links to the skills and understandings of the content standards required for students to reach grade level expectations.
So one of the things that we hope that you all see is that really vibrant student experiences and deeper learning, they are at the heart of the intent of our Kentucky Academic Standards, but we recognize that schools and districts need more support and guidance in implementing those standards at the local level in a way that truly does impact the classroom experience for all of our students. And so the visual that you see here on the slide, it's just one way that we illustrate what research is telling us are some of those critical steps that are necessary for this work to occur. And it really involves moving from vision to impact and improve student outcomes. And so I quickly just want to walk you through those 4 steps you see here. So the first step is for the district to ensure that they have a common instructional vision in place for each content area across their district. Then based on that vision, they need to ensure that they have equipped their students and teachers with access to a strong local curriculum that's supported by high quality instructional resources that are giving teachers the tools that they need to then actualize that vision. And we know that just simply giving teachers access to the resources is not enough in helping them to make the instructional shifts necessary to provide that vibrant student learning experience. And so districts need to ensure that they are giving their teachers and leaders access to high quality professional learning that is building their skill and understanding around what makes high quality instruction that we can provide to each and every student. And when districts can intentionally ensure that they're taking these 4 actions and that these things are in place, then we begin to see that impact on the student experiences and on those student outcomes. And that is the purpose of KBE's curriculum development process that is outlined in the model curriculum framework. So now getting into more specific aspects of our work. And this document just lays out possible guidance, a possible process that districts can use to develop and implement a strong local curriculum that is supported by high quality instructional resources. And some of you, that might be a newer term when we talk about high quality instructional resources. And just know that throughout this presentation, we'll often refer to those as HQIR. So I know we'll slip into that, so I just wanted to point that out to you. But when you look at this process, the first phase is just very logistical in nature, making sure that you have everything prepared for the work ahead. But in phase 2, this is where we provide guidance to districts as they articulate their instructional vision for the content area of focus. And this was one of the main lessons that were learned, that was learned by districts participating in both our reading and writing and math pilots that they shared with us as they were implementing this process. They consistently spoke to how the work of really collaboratively creating their instructional vision with their stakeholders for the content area, it allowed them to really then use that vision as the main driver for the rest of the process. And it was something that they were able to come back to over and over again. And if you were to get into the document for phase 2, you would see that we recommend to districts that they focus on and ensure that these 3 lenses are reflected throughout their instructional vision. So the first lens is to ensure that their vision is aligned to the Kentucky Academic Standards for the content area and the foundational beliefs that are built within those standards. The second lens is to ensure that the vision is aligned to the current research for teaching and learning in the content area and what has actually been shown to improve student outcomes. Then that third lens is for them to take into account their local context. So looking at the needs of their community, the uniqueness of their student population, and really considering their local priorities and initiatives. And in our pilot districts, we saw many of them where they were building in their profile of the learner competencies, as well as some of their deeper learning initiatives into their instructional vision for the content area. And we just want to show you some different ways that we have seen districts incorporating this into their work.
And so really, we want to give you an opportunity to explore some of those sample instructional visions from Kentucky schools. So in a second, you have the opportunity to examine a reading and writing example from Anchorage Independent, a mathematics example from Powell County, and or a social studies example from Woodford County. And really, as you explore, we would like for you to just make note of any connections you see between those instructional visions and the 3 tenets of Unite We Learn, or those core elements of deeper learning. So I'm going to go ahead and I will drop those links into the chat. And so you should have access to those now. The links are now in the chat. And really, we want to give you about 4 to 5 minutes to look through these. We know that is not enough time to get through all 3, so please feel free to prioritize the 1 or 2 that you most want to explore. And really, again, we want you to look for and note those connections to United We Learn and deeper learning. Before we give you some time to read through those and look at that, what questions do you have? And then is anybody having any issues accessing the documents? All right, we will pause now.
I'm sorry, Thomas. Could you put the deeper learning tenets in the chat too, so like I can remember what I'm supposed to be thinking about?
Yeah, we will get those in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
And Melanie and the other folks on, when I do my part discussing deeper learning in our deeper learning dozen, I'll be sure to really hit upon those tenets as well.
All right, we will pause now and give you some time to individually explore, again, noting those connections to Unite We Learn and deeper learning. All right, let's take some time to do a whole group share out. So as you explored those instructional visions, think about those connections you noted with United We Learn or deeper learning, and really just want to provide the space now to please feel free to unmute and share, or if you're more comfortable, please post your takeaways in the chat. Of any connections you saw with United We Learn or deeper learning, or just some takeaways from the instructional visions.
This is just a takeaway, but I did like the couple of them where they described it based on the role, like what the teachers would be doing, what the administrators would be doing, what the students would be doing. I thought that made things provided a lot of clarity.
Yeah, and Melody, I think that was something that we heard when we met with district leadership during our March leadership meetings. We heard that a lot, as well as they really like the clarity in roles that were defined in some of those documents. And I see Dr. Woodstucker put in the chat, in examining the social studies framework, there's attention to mastery beyond traditional assessments. And so that, one of my takeaways in looking through that as well, Dr. Woodstucker, was that look to have that engaging assessment that was, and they use the term authentic. And I think they gave the example of the kindergarten course where they're working through and doing something where they're assessing kind of the rules of kindergarten in that authentic form.
Absolutely. And as you know, innovation, especially when we look at assessments, is one of the 3 big ideas of United We Learn. And I cannot think of a clearer example than that, moving beyond the traditional true, false, maybe an extension to a short answer response to a question to really demonstrate mastery. It's a great example.
And I thought I saw somebody who had their hand up, so please feel free to unmute and kind of share out.
I believe it was Sarah.
It's me. Yes, thank you. I noticed, and I didn't spend a lot of time, honestly, looking at the math document because I was a little nervous that I would not fully understand it. It's been a lot of years. Social studies and English, I'm there. But one of the things that I really appreciated, first of all, as a social studies teacher, I wish that 20, 25 years ago, I would have had documents like this to help me as a new teacher understand how to put together valuable lessons for my students. And so where I do think that there's value just generally across the board for everyone, especially those that are newer to the profession, I think things like this are just invaluable to help you know if you're on the right track. But I think specifically connecting to United We Learn, having that stakeholder input, but then the social studies and English, you're able to see also as a student how you fit into the larger community, like whether it's drawing community context to your social studies lessons, to the literature that you're reading. And that helps, I think, build those interdisciplinary connections and understandings, and just helps with that knowledge gap that so many of our kids have. It just gives a much more well-rounded education instead of all of our disciplines and content areas functioning in separate silos.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I really appreciate the kind of the pulling out of what I'm calling, and hopefully I'm characterizing this right, but that transactive piece of engaging community. So not only are we reaching out, but there's that reach in or showcasing that you are part of the community. So that was really, really beautiful. And I think that one of the things we continue to hear is that piece, and I'm pulling out something else you said, was just that foundational piece of like, here is kind of like our guide for what we're thinking about or what we think instruction should look like in these content areas in our district. And so having that as a guide, I think, in my own practice, I think that would have been very helpful for me as well, of just knowing that like, all right, this is our expectation for students in social studies, because that's my background in the state or in our district. And so I think that we've seen some good feedback on that as well. And then I'm seeing a lot of connections with including stakeholders in the framework and students and teachers. You see a clear connection between standards within the content area and how students will learn the content in a deeper way. Yeah, I really do appreciate the way that a lot of these are student-centered and student-focused. Fox's social studies framework hits on a range of deeper learning elements: inquiry, complex thinking, negotiating, divergent perspectives, evidence-based argumentation, connecting learning to real-world issues and conversations. And I think that was the thing that sticks out to me is that real-world and relevant that Woodford County uses in there. Is I think it's a lot of that is they're taking through the standards and really thinking through kind of what they want students to experience within Woodford County. All right. Well, I appreciate you all, and thank you for the great conversation and great feedback. And please feel free if there's more you want to drop in the chat. I think this is all really good feedback and really good things to note. Now, we do want to share, just take a moment to share a couple of other highlights within each of the documents. So within Powell County, that instructional vision, mathematics instructional vision, you can see they really start with their local learner competencies, and then the rest of the vision lays out kind of what that looks like in math. So, not only is that, giving students access to practice that mathematical discourse, but there's also that chance for them, and they're really building in that communication and collaboration, not just with student and teacher, but amongst the peers as well. And then in Anchorage, so as part of that reading and writing vision, Anchorage Independent really laid out what they would see as evidence when they're achieving their vision of a vibrant student learning experience. And so, I thought some notes that were specific and things I took was really that kind of engaging and having access to disciplinary specific tasks, having the opportunity to collaborate and make new meaning with other students, being part of that process of selecting text and topics to be covered and having that honored, and then reading and writing taking place in a multitude of different ways. So a lot of very student-centered kind of experience language in there. And then within Woodford County, they really synthesized to me the foundational beliefs to determine what they meant in terms of priorities for curriculum design, to really focus on how they were going to evaluate a high quality instructional resource. So again, with some of the things I heard from you all really around that authentic learning and authentic assessment. So providing those learning experiences that are relevant to their lives. Having students have the opportunity to delve into those compelling questions and evaluate and experience a multitude or a lot of different sources. And then really that authentic assessment piece that Dr. Woodstoker, that you brought about, is having those questions focused on things that really impact students. And I will now turn it over to Misty Higgins, who will talk through the curriculum development process, phase 3 and YHQRs.
And so
Thank you all.
And as you all can see, again, going back to our visual to kind of ground us through this. So while creating that common instructional vision is a critical first step, it alone is not going to change the learning experience and student outcomes. So the next step is then to ensure that teachers and students have access to a strong local curriculum that's supported by high quality instructional resources that are aligned to that district's instructional vision. And again, that is the purpose of phase 3 of KBE's curriculum development process. And as you look at step 1 in phase 3, this is where we provide specific guidance as districts identify, evaluate, and select their HQIRs. And within this, part of that is they need to determine their specific selection criteria that they're going to use to identify and evaluate some potential HQIRs. And there are 2 places in which we recommend that they derive those selection criteria. One is from the instructional vision itself that they created back in phase 2. But the second is from input that they gather from the various stakeholder groups in their district. And we have included tools and resources in this process that they can use to help gather that input from their stakeholders. And again, going back to our pilot districts, we saw where some pilot districts within their selection criteria, they were specifically looking for HQIRs that would help them develop those competencies that they had identified in their profile of the learner in their student. And then we saw other districts that one of their specific selection criteria was around finding an HQIR that had an inquiry-based approach to really support some of their deeper learning initiatives and their PBL work. And so within phase 3 guidance, we also have included KBE's general definition of HQIRs. So what do we even mean when we say that an instructional resource is a high quality instructional resource? So we have identified 6 characteristics. I want to pause and just give you a moment to read through those. So why such an emphasis on HQIRs in our work? Well, we want to spend just the next few minutes looking at some of the research around the adverse impact when students and teachers don't have access to HQIRs and the potential positive impacts when they do. And as we go through this next series of slides, we encourage you all to make some notes. So what maybe are some things that are really resonating with you from the slides, or maybe some information and data that's especially surprising to you? And you can do that in whatever way works best for you. So maybe just making some mental notes, or you might want to grab a sheet of paper right now and just jot down some notes, because at the conclusion of the slides on why HQIRs, we'll stop and have some whole group debriefing. So let's start with looking at the adverse impact when teachers do not have access to HQIRs. Well, we know that when they don't have access, they're spending 7 hours a week, up to 250 hours per school year, simply creating or curating their own assignments. I want to pause, give you a moment to just kind of take in the slide, and then I'll highlight a few key points. So where are teachers going to get these resources when they don't have access to HQIRs? Well, we know they tend to go to those places that are most easily accessible. So typically online, to places like Google, Teachers Pay Teachers, and Pinterest, just to name a few. And this is resulting in the use of unvetted resources that are often low in quality and are leading to inequities in that student experience. And the graphs on the slide are illustrating how these resources, whether they are found or made by the teacher, are falling short of what we want to see in that vibrant student experience. So looking at that first graph and grade level alignment, we see that teachers selected or created assignments are aligned to the grade level standards only 20% of the time. And what about those subject-specific practices that we've been talking about? Only 13% of teacher-created or selected assignments are allowing our students to access and engage with the disciplinary practices that are built into the Kentucky academic standards. And then what about those authentic connections? Only 16% of teacher-created or selected assignments are helping our students to make those rich connections to big ideas and to the world. And if you're wondering about the grade bars on here, that just represents the results that you would get if districts are doing that same work that teachers do, meaning they are internally creating their own resources, or they're also just piecemealing together from different places. And while you might get slightly different or better results, you're going to see it still is way short of what we're wanting in that vibrant student experience. This next slide is looking at research that was done by the Fordham Institute. So what they did is they went to these places online that teachers tend to go to, and they were evaluating the resources for DOK, or depth of knowledge, which we know is the cognitive demand that is required of students to engage in that content. So again, I'll pause, give you time to take in this slide, and then I'll hit a few key points. So when they evaluated these resources, they found that most of the content within those activities were really at a DOK level 1 or 2, which is really recall and reproduction, so basic facts and information. Nearly half of the activities that they evaluated had no DOK level 3, which this is beginning to get into some of those elements of deeper learning, looking at that strategic and critical thinking. And 94% of those activities had no DOK level 4, which is that applied and extended thinking. So then what's the impact of this on the student experience when teachers don't have access to HQIRs? It's leading to inconsistent access to grade level work. Students are spending about 581 of the 720 available hours in a day on assignments that are not grade level appropriate. And if you kind of do the math on that, that's roughly 81% of the student's school year. And the research tells us that this is impacting our students of color and those that are economically disadvantaged the most. So clearly, access to HQIRs, it is an equity issue for both our teachers and for our students. There are implications beyond high school as well. So on this slide, I'm going to kind of move from left to right. So what we know is that nationally, about 40% of students leaving high school going into college are having to take at least one remedial course. And those courses are covering content that they should have mastered in high school. Then moving to the center of the slide, well, that's coming at a cost to students and their families to the tune of about $1.5 billion annually. And then as we move to the right, it's also impacting our students that are moving straight from school into the workforce, with business and industry partners telling us that students are missing the key skills that are needed for employability. But what can happen when teachers have access to and effectively implement HQIRs? Well, the research tells us it leads to improvements in teachers' practice and gains in student achievement. So just want to highlight a little bit of the national research around this. So a 2017 study showed that the effect of a teacher using an HQIR on student learning was the same as moving an average performing teacher to a teacher performing at the 80th percentile. And then a 2018 study showed that teachers that were using a high quality math instructional resource, that they were allowing their students to really engage in the mathematical practices at a significantly higher rate than teachers who just did not have access to an HQIR. Again, going back to some of those deeper learning connections. And while this last study was looking at math specifically, this would likely hold true in other content areas as well, because of the intentional research-based design of HQIRs and their emphasis on engaging students in the practices of the discipline. Now, that's looking at some national data, but what about right here in Kentucky? What impact are we seeing when it comes to HQIRs with our teachers and students? So we gathered feedback from our pilot districts, we've done some site visits with them, and what we're hearing is in terms of impact on teachers. Teachers are saying that rather than spending all that time creating and curating their own assignments, they're now really freeing up their time to leverage the key aspects that are in the HQIR and all of those built-in supports to now really better meet the individual needs of their students. And as they're consistently putting that grade level work from the HQIR in front of the students and using those built-in supports, the teachers are raising their expectations of what their students are able to know and do, regardless of ability or background. They're seeing them be successful on that grade level work. And what about with our students? Well, the districts have talked about how the HQIRs really help to build the necessary background knowledge that students need to successfully engage in the grade level content, and how it is introducing them to places, cultures, and experiences that they may not have otherwise had access or exposure to, especially our students from lower SES. And the one that I love the most, they've talked about how they've really seen an increase in student interest and confidence in learning, even when engaging with that challenging material. And they've talked about how parents are even sharing with them how their kids are coming home talking about what they read and what they learned in school that day. So we know that was a lot of information to take in. So we do want to stop and process, and we're going to do that in a couple of different ways. So the first way is just going to be more individual. So I want everyone to just think, out of those slides looking at adverse impact and potential positive impact, what is maybe one thing that most resonated with you, or information or data that was most surprising? So just think, what is that one thing that really stood out to you, and just get that in your mind. And when you have that thought ready, would you please post it in the chat for us? And Thomas, as things start coming in, will you let me know, just because I'm sharing my screen here? So again, one thing that really stood out to you from those slides around the importance of HQIRs.
The amount of time spent finding non-quality resources.
And I would say, I even think that's on the low end, that estimate they gave of 7 hours a week, just, being in the classroom 10 years. Again, I think that's kind of on the low end.
Improved access to grade level learning for students via HQIR. The DOK 3 and 4 data is eye-opening, frustrating, and a call to action.
Yep.
Cost of college remediation over $1 billion could be saved, especially for poor children and children of color.
Yep. Love those. Great takeaways. And then as those continue to come in, we do want to open up to just for some whole group share out, more conversation. So please feel free to unmute, and you can maybe elaborate on something you put in the chat, what you're seeing others put in the chat. But I just want to pause now and give a chance for people to actually come off of mute and start a conversation around that. Or if you're more comfortable, you can continue posting in the chat as well.
And Misty Sasha started her reply with, honestly, I could have said amen to each slide. It summed up my entire decade of teaching 8th grade English. I was given nothing but an empty classroom and a set of keys when I started, and I know my experience isn't unique. Teachers and kids deserve much more. And then Sarah says, I felt those teaching hours spent on developing learning materials and activities in my soul. It took a tremendous amount of time, energy, and knowledge. On one hand, I felt like it forced me to really know and understand my standards in a way I wouldn't have done otherwise. But I had great support from curriculum folks in my district to help ensure quality. Still, I likely fell short.
And then think just for time's sake, please continue going ahead and posting in the chat, but I do want to move this along so we can wrap up our portion and hand you over to the wonderful MTSS people. And so just to wrap up here within phase 3. So again, step 1 is all about identifying, evaluating, and selecting HQIRs and guidance that we give to support districts in that. But the curriculum development process document itself that we've created is general guidance. It is meant to just be applied to each and every content area, but we recognize that when districts got right here to phase 3, step 1, they needed some more support. So we have been developing what we call content area consumer guides, and these just provide more support on the content specific characteristics of HQIRs that are aligned back to the general characteristics that you saw earlier. So we currently have consumer guides available for reading and writing and for math, and we have plans to develop the science consumer guide this upcoming school year.
All right, so once a district has a strong local curriculum supported by HQIR or HQIRs, the next step is to provide teachers and leaders with high quality professional learning, focus on effective implementation and building a shared understanding of what that looks like in practice using the high quality instructional resource. So phase 4 of the curriculum development process really focuses on implementing and monitoring the curriculum over time. If you look at this slide, the visual on the right side of the slide represents that implementation cycle, a key aspect of which is really to provide ongoing professional learning as the district really is striving to get closer to realizing the aims of their instructional vision in all classrooms. And so as part of this understanding of what constitutes high quality professional learning, and based on research, the KBE has identified 8 characteristics of high quality professional learning that are listed here on the slide. So this was recently revised, so it will look slightly different than what you got in the pre-reading, but I do want to just give you a moment to read through those characteristics real quick. And so in looking through those characteristics, I want to point out just a couple of the revisions. So you see that equity focus bullet, that's really about making sure that teachers are provided professional learning that supports that help them effectively engage all students in rigorous grade level appropriate tasks, including students with acceleration needs, English learning or English learners, and students with exceptional needs. And then there's the bullet on symmetrical to the vibrant student learning experience. And this really focuses on ensuring that educators are engaging in PL that is inquiry-based, interactive, and collaborative, essentially mimicking that experience that students would be having. So our current work centers on providing more support to schools and districts around high-quality professional learning, and specifically on curriculum-based professional learning. We are now in the research and development phase of a guidance document that we are hoping to release during the next school year, and that will include tools, resources, and other supports for the different stages of curriculum implementation. Okay, and so throughout the pilot experiences, we heard over and over from districts how critically important stakeholder communication and inclusion was throughout the entirety of the process, which directly connects to the United We Learn emphasis on collaboration with our communities. We have made revisions to the curriculum development process and created specific tools and resources to support districts in intentionally focusing on stakeholder communication and inclusion within each of the phases of the curriculum development process. Part of our ongoing work now is really trying to elevate those bright spots on the student learning experience and ways districts are effectively collaborating with their stakeholders as examples for other districts in the state. Finally, part of the goal of this work is to really encourage districts to scale the work and move it forward. And so we're already seeing that with a few districts who are, while they focused on, developing a high quality local curriculum, getting that HQIR and working on implementation in one area, they're starting to scale that to other content areas while continuing to focus on that core content area in which they started. I want to pause just for a second to see what questions you have, because we have given you a lot of information before we turn over to the MTSS team. So if there are any questions, please feel free to unmute or drop in the chat, and then we will turn it over to our MTSS team shortly. All right. Well, again, feel free to reach out with any questions you have about HQIRs, about instructional visions, the curriculum development process, and we are more than happy to talk with you. And I'm now going to turn it over to Melissa Wainwright and Jan Sellers, who are going to talk with you about multi-tiered system of supports.
Thank you, Thomas and Misty. I am even more excited about sharing the work with KYMTSS after hearing the presentation that you've shared. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm Melissa Wainwright, and I serve as the Kentucky MTSS coordinator, and I'm joined today by Jan Sellers, who is a former MTSS coordinator, and she's a current academic program consultant. Jan and I are excited today to discuss the agency's work around KYMTSS. We're going to talk about where it is, how we got to this integrated framework, and how MTSS creates a structure for the delivery of high-quality instruction, intervention, and supports. Part of how we do this is by creating and laying a foundation through common language. We'd like you to take a moment and look at the definition that Kentucky has for KYMTSS, and then share a word or phrase in the chat that might resonate with you regarding the definition.
I'm seeing things like social emotional differentiation. We do have a bit of a time crunch here because we only have 15 minutes left for both deeper learning and us. So
okay, we will move quickly, Jan.
Yeah.
So a key
Whole
takeaway.
child. I'm just kind of
else?
seeing some things that are coming through.
And what we'd like you to think about as you consider that definition is that KYMTSS is a continuous improvement framework that organizes and promotes integration of the various multi-tiered systems and the state, district, and school initiatives. I'll put it on fast here, Jan. And you all are familiar with the KDE initiative, United We Learn. And what I would like to just point out here is that one of the things that KYMTSS we work to do is to ensure that educators are equipped with what they need and students are getting the academic and behavioral and social emotional support they need. And this integrated framework allows us to work collectively and not to work in isolation. This framework promotes systems alignment and provides ways to ensure that the initiatives are selected and they are aligned to the school and district improvement goals in order to provide more cohesive, seamless support. And how did we get to this integrated system? Jan is going to share with us just a little bit about that journey.
Thank you, Melissa. It's really important, I think, that the slides are not showing on my screen quite. I'm going to change my view, but I think it's really important for us to look at our path to how we got to this integrated framework, because it is a framework that helps integrate all those various initiatives so we are not working in isolation. And those of you who have been in education for a while may be familiar with positive behavior intervention and supports, or PBIS, or response to intervention, RTI. And as you can see, PBIS has been around a bit longer than RTI. It was introduced back in 1997 as part of the reauthorization of IDEA, and it really was a framework for explicitly teaching positive behavior and behavior expectations, much like we teach reading, math, and other core content. RTI really gained popularity after the 2004 reauthorization, and it allowed educators to identify students with specific learning disabilities based on their response to a scientific research-based instruction. Both PBIS and RTI are multi-tiered frameworks. They're built around key characteristic of research-based practices. However, because of the emphasis on identifying students with learning disabilities, RTI was often viewed as just a system of hoops to jump through to get a student identified for special education. And rather than a systems framework that looked at those universal supports, like we were talking about for academics earlier, the universal support, along with interventions, both targeted and intensive, is what makes MTSS a framework. And there was also confusion around, did RTI really, was it inclusive of behavior and social emotional supports? And so what happened is PBIS really became an isolated framework. In 2009, Kentucky developed their system of intervention, and that was our framework for response to intervention for a long time. It did include behavior and academics, but we ran across the same thing. We saw strengths to the model, but there was confusion around how to integrate academics and behavior, and teams tended to operate as separate entities that were not communicating and collaborating effectively. And so the end result is we would get two sets of interventions that sometimes worked in opposition of each other. It was really in 2005 with the introduction of Every Student Succeed Act that we began to see a shift nationally to the language of MTSS as a comprehensive framework that improved outcomes for all students, not just struggling students. And in Kentucky, our conversations around RTI began within the early learning roundtable back in 2019, and that prompted a cross-agency MTSS project. We had members of the Office of Teaching and Learning, members of the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, and the Office of Continuous Improvement and Supports, working together to determine a need to expand our existing KSI guidance to be more comprehensive of a framework that would encompass academics, behavior, and social emotional supports. And that's what resulted in our definition of MTSS and the development of web-based tools and resources. And then with the passage of Kentucky's Read to Succeed Act, MTS is now reflected in statute, and it's an initiative within our strategic plan. So I'd like to take a look with you around what really comprises Kentucky's framework, because these 6 essential elements are necessary for an effective implementation. And if you really look at our graphic, it's designed to illustrate how all of those parts are interconnected. None of them exist in isolation, and they're embedded in all layers of the framework. It is really surrounded by that concept of equitable access and opportunity that surrounds the entire framework. It's an intentional commitment to equity within all components of the system. And our goal is to ensure that every student has access to the high quality instructional resources and supports they need at just the right moment in their education. At the center, you'll see the heart of the framework is that tiered delivery system. It's really a layered support to promote, designed to maximize student success. Promoting academic proficiency, like we talked about earlier at the universal level with those high quality instructional resources, but also to promote positive behavior and social emotional wellness. Each of those other 4 components exist at all layers of that continuum, and our collaborative problem-solving teams are established at all levels: district, school, teacher, and individual student. And they're aligned to support those common goals and those initiatives. And all the teams engage in database decision-making using data from a comprehensive screening and assessment system to establish those goals for improvement. They monitor progress, and then they make those adaptations as needed to the universal instruction, to the intervention and supports, again, so all students could be successful. And a systematic process, kind of like what Misty just was describing with the curriculum development process, is in place to ensure that we select instructional resources, intervention, and supports that are grounded in the research that works. And then an integral part of the whole framework are those family, school, and community partnerships. And these are purposeful. They're reciprocal relationships between the schools, which are educators and students, as well as our families and our community partners. They're actively engaging in collaboration with the goal of improving student outcomes. So Melissa's going to walk you through some of the resources that we have to support implementation and what it looks like at a level from the state to the student level.
You can see on the screen an image of the KYMTSS website, which is a key resource for installation, implementation, and sustainability of a multi-tiered system of supports.
Your slide didn't change.
It didn't change?
Ladies, I'm so sorry, but I think that we are going to have to transition so that Dr. Tucker can speak to the DLD. I apologize for the timing issues, but I believe, Sarah, will you be able to share the presentation with committee members following the meeting?
Yes, absolutely, Mickey. Thank you for
Thank you so
bringing that to our
much.
attention. I will share before the end of our meeting here in just a few moments. Everyone will get the link to our shared Google folder, which will include all of the resources from today.
May I just say one thing, because the slides will not do justice to the one that is the image that you will see, which is the cascading system of supports. It's actually sharing a real world example, exactly showing the impact of high quality instructional resources and the cascading system of supports that the Department of Education provides from the state to the students. That will not do justice from the slide, and you'll just see a slide with cascading system of supports with blue rectangles on it. And just know that that is an exciting story of the work of KDE using the KYMTSS framework to support regions, districts, schools, classrooms, and down to the students. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Woods-Tucker, we'll bring you in to discuss briefly, if you will, the impact and work that you've been involved with the Deeper Learning Dozen. And as we wrap, I'll also include a link to our Google folder so that folks can dive in after the meeting. An hour is an awfully short amount of time for us to be together. So appreciate the passion and energy that you all are putting into this.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and certainly thanks to the Kentucky Board of Education for allowing the Office of Teaching and Learning to participate in this second session of the work group learning experiences. And it's certainly a pleasure as the Deputy Commissioner in the Office of Teaching and Learning to really hear the great things that are happening. And believe it or not, Sarah, I know there was a reason why you put me last, but this grandson of a preacher man will do this less than 5 minutes so we can get ourselves back on track. So let's skip to slide 3. I'm going to give you a quick, although there's not a universal definition of what deeper learning is, but this is a definition that our Deeper Learning Dozen has used. The Deeper Learning Dozen is a group of 12 school districts in the United States and Canada and your Kentucky Department of Education. So our working definition of deeper learning is that it's the understanding of not just the surface features of a subject or discipline, but it's the underlying structures of ideas. And this definition and the group was founded by Joel Mehta, a Harvard Graduation School of Education professor, and also John Watkins. And what they were looking for over a 10-year period, they were really looking for some key elements of innovative examples of deeper learning. And some of those innovative examples are mastery, identity, and creativity, some things that you've heard. Right there in the paragraph below that has some examples of deeper learning, you'll see it really pairs up well with the Kentucky Portrait of a Learner. Okay, Sarah, let's skip now to let's skip 2 slides to the Deeper Learning Dozen, a quick picture. Keep going, please. Right there. If you can go forward 1 more slide. Folks, this is a picture of our Deeper Learning Dozen folks. We convened here. We had the pleasure of convening in Kentucky, in Lexington, in 2022. And we have several people on this call who took part in this. And again, you heard some of these terms here a little earlier. We believe that equity undergirding our high quality instructional resources and standards, that it's structural, and that adult and student learning happens in symmetry. You heard Thomas Klaus mention symmetry, students and staff learning, and that leadership accelerates the emergence of deeper learning. Okay, now let's skip to page 7 when we look at KDE's North Star. Okay, very good, Sarah. So when we ask, what is our North Star? The group was asked, what is our North Star? It's the United We Learn. And you've heard from Fox and Thomas and Misty earlier about the definitions of United We Learn: creating more vibrant experiences, encouraging innovation, and creating a bold new future for Kentucky schools through collaboration with our communities. That is, in essence, our North Star. So now let's skip to the next page. This was going to be an interactive part here, and maybe we'll have maybe a minute or two to talk a little bit about this. Deeper Learning does in teams reflections. So we talked about what is our North Star, but I certainly would want someone to jump in here and talk about, do we find it clear and compelling? Do we find the big ideas of United We Learn clear and compelling? Who is it not resonating with? What evidence do you have that this North Star has penetrated our system? And what risk are you taking? What risks are we taking? And how are we collecting evidence of our transformation? So if you would jump in for just 1 minute, we have 2 minutes and 2 seconds left. If you can jump in and maybe react to some of those questions. You know, do people find United We Learn? Do they find it compelling? You know, how are we getting the word out? And what risks are we taking? And how are we collecting evidence?
Thomas, I think one of the risks that I hear from local districts often is the current system. When we talk specifically about assessment and accountability within the conversation of United We Learn, is that the current system works for us. The hesitation to change the routine and do something differently makes some local communities nervous, and I think rightfully so, if what's working currently is going well.
Yeah, very good. And then I'll focus on this question here. Is your case for change resonating with people? Given our Kentucky Board of Education's support through United We Learn and the COOL Council, I certainly want to give a shout out to our COOL Council and all of the work that they've done, which is a 75-member stakeholder group comprised of students, family members, community members, and business members. You're helping us spread the word. So thank you. And now, Sarah, let's skip over to what I believe the most important page here, which is the last page. And folks, you definitely want to, not the thank you, right before the thank you, I'm sorry, which is innovative examples of deeper learning, page 9. Sorry about that, Sarah. If you want to see this work really being showcased, the first 3 or 4 examples are from Rowan County, OVEC. You'll see some examples in JCPS. These are printed examples. They're on our website. Sarah has access to these, and she's doing a great job along with David Cook curating these resources. But please, if we had time, we would click on a couple of these videos where you see testimonials and examples of folks discussing deeper learning and how it is penetrating their system. And now, Sarah, the last page. Thank you. This presentation will be made available to each of you, and I would encourage you to take some time to go through the presentation. I do apologize. We had to do this in 6 minutes. But again, kudos to the entire team, and what wonderful work. I could not be more proud, and I know Dr. Glass could not be more proud of the work that the Office of Teaching and Learning and the other offices are doing here in Kentucky to change the trajectory of students and staff.
Thank you all so much for engaging, and thanks for our presenters today. You can expect a pretty hefty post-meeting email from me. I'll make sure that you're well equipped with resources and information that our presenters wanted to share in lieu of a limited time together today. We'll also perhaps draft up a few potential value statements for you to wrestle with and think about and contribute to for our next session as we work to synthesize all of the learning that you've done over the last 2 weeks. So want to be mindful of your time today. Please do expect that email from me after our meeting today with the call recording, and feel free to engage, reply all, really keep the conversation going in that asynchronous space as well. Thank you all so much for your time today, and look forward to connecting next week.
Bye-bye.